Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bestow upon all of you His protection, His mercy, and many of His blessings. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Seeking assistance and blessings by every name of Allah, the possessor of limitless mercy, the bestower of mercy. We begin our session today, resuming our reading from the book Sifatu Salat al-Nabiyyi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Prophet's prayer described, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we will resume the session by reading the portion that we covered in Arabic in our last session, along with the corresponding English for it, keeping in mind some of the amendments that we made based on suggestions that we presented in our previous lesson. So we'll begin where it says here, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, seeking assistance and blessings by every name of Allah, the possessor of limitless mercy, the bestower of mercy. I begin. Muqaddimatul Kitab al-Ula, the book's initial introduction. Alhamdulillah alladhi farada as-salata ala ibadihi. Praise be to Allah who made prayer compulsory for all of the people whom He created. وَأَمَرَهُمْ بِإِقَامَتِهَا وَحُسْنِ أَدَائِهَا, who ordered them to establish it and perform it well. وَعَلَّقَ النَّجَاحَ وَالْفَلَاحَ بِالْخُشُوعِ فِيهَا, who linked success and felicity to humility and prayer. وَجَعَلَهَا فُرْقَانًا بَيْنَ الْإِيمَانِ وَالْكُفْرِ, who made it the criterion to distinguish between Iman, accepting and complying with the truth from Allah, and Kufr, rejecting the truth from Allah. وَنَاهِيَةً عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ, who made it a restrainer from all that is obscene and all that is unacceptable. وَالصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ عَلَى نَبِيِّنَا مُحَمَّدٍ, may Allah grant commendation and protection to our Prophet Muhammad, al-mukhatabi biqawlihi ta'ala, who was addressed in the words of the Exalted, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ, and we have sent down to you the message so that you may explain clearly to the people what has been sent down for them. فقام صلى الله عليه وسلم بهذه الوظيفة حق القيام, and who fully carried out this task. وكانت الصلاة من أعظم ما بينه للناس قولا وفعلا. The prayer was one of the most important things which he explained to the people verbally and practically. حتى إنه صلى مرة على المنبر يقوم عليه ويركع ثم قال لهم, even praying on the pulpit once, standing and bowing while there, and then saying to them, إنما صنعت هذا لتأتموا بي وَلِتَعَلَّمُوا صَلَاتِي, I have done this so that you may follow me and learn my prayer. وَأَوْجَبَ عَلَيْنَا الِاقْتِدَاءَ بِهِ فِيهَا فَقَالَ صَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي. He obligated us to copy him in his prayer, saying, pray as you have seen me praying. وَبَشَّرَ مَنْ صَلَّاهَا كَصَلَاتِهِ أَنَّ لَهُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَهْدًا أَنْ يُدْخِلَهُ الْجَنَّةَ. He also conveyed glad tidings to whoever prayed like him, that such a person has a covenant with Allah then he will enter that person into paradise. فقال خمس صلوات افترضهن الله عز وجل. He said, there are 5 prayers which Allah, mighty and sublime, has made compulsory. من أحسن وضوءهن وصلاهن لوقتهن وأتم ركوعهن وسجودهن وخشوعهن. If a person performs wudu well for them, praise them at their proper times, and is complete in their bowings, prostrations, and humility, كان له على الله عهد أن يغفر له. That person has a guarantee from Allah that He will forgive him. ومن لم يفعل فليس له على الله عهد إن شاء غفر له وإن شاء عذبه. But a person who does not do so has no guarantee from Allah. If Allah wishes, He will forgive him, and if Allah wishes, He will punish him. وعلى آله وصحبه الأتقياء البررة. May Allah also grant commendation and protection to His Prophet's family and companions who strove to protect themselves from Allah's punishment and were very obedient to Allah. الذين نقلوا إلينا عبادته صلى الله عليه وسلم وصلاته وأقواله وأفعاله. They passed on to us the worship, prayer, sayings, and actions of the Prophet. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection. وَجَعَلُوهَا وَحْدَهَا لَهُمْ مَذْهَبًا وَقُدْوَةً. And they made these, and these alone, a madhab and a path for themselves to follow. وَعَلَى مَنْ هَذَا حَذْوَهُمْ وَسَلَكَ سَبِيلَهُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الدِّينِ. May Allah also grant commendation and protection to those who follow in their footsteps and tread their path until the day of judgment. This is the portion that we had covered in our previous session, and now we're going to resume from the following page in the Arabic copy. The copy that we're currently on will be on page 33 of that copy. So what we'll do is we'll follow the same approach that we did last time. And for those who have the handout, you can follow that along. And for those who need access to it, for those who are following on the stream, the banner at the bottom of the screen has a link to the page with the class materials and the resources that we're using in these sessions. So if you go to that link, you'll be able to access the materials, and today's handout is posted there. The portion that I just read, it's in the handout as well. And what we're going to move on to now is in the handout too at the applicable portion. It says it comes under the heading New Portion for this lesson. Okay, so picking up now from page 33 in the Arabic copy that we're currently using, the author says, وَبَعْدُ. And what we'll do, we'll read it piece by piece, and we will also make some remarks as we were doing in our previous session. We'll make the remarks as we proceed bit by bit at the applicable places. So the author here says, وَبَعْدُ. And a comment we would like to make about this phrase or this expression in Arabic, وَبَعْدُ. In the English, there was no corresponding translation for it. So this is what prompted us to say something. And what we would like to say is that this could perhaps be rendered into English as something along the lines of, as for what follows that introduction. As for what follows that introduction, or, and after the preceding introduction, and then you sort of continue with what you have to say. So this expression in Arabic, it acts as a sort of transition when someone is speaking, and also when someone's writing, you can use this as a sort of transition from one idea to another, and it's especially used after an introduction. When you begin speaking or you begin writing, and you say something or you write something, when you have finished your sort of introduction or preface or prelude, and you want to now begin the main subject matter, this expression is used in Arabic, وَبَعْدُ. And in English, it might not be that necessary, and this might be why the translation did not mention it. But like we said, it could be rendered into English along the lines of, something along the lines of, and after that introduction, or as for what follows that introduction, something along those lines. The author then said, فَإِنِّي لَمَّا انْتَهَيْتُ من قراءة كتاب الصلاة من الترغيب والترهيب للحافظ المنذري رحمه الله وتدريسه على بعض إخواننا السلفيين وذلك منذ 4 سنين. The corresponding English said, when I finished reading the book of prayer in At-Targhib wa-Tarhib by Al-Hafiz Al-Munziri rahimahullah, and teaching it to our brothers 4 years ago. There are a few comments we wanted to make here. The author, he mentions something called Kitab al-Salati. Kitab al-Salati, which was rendered into English in the translation as the Book of Prayer. What we wanted to say is that this is actually a chapter. It's not a book of its own. Kitab al-Salati is a chapter in the book called At-Targhib wa-Tarhib, which the title of which basically means strong encouragement for doing right and strong discouragement from doing wrong. And if I'm not mistaken, I think, hold on, so I was just looking over at one of the shelves at the library here. I think I remember having seen the book. Or we'll try to pull it out later on, inshallah. There's a copy that Shaykh Al-Albani prepared of that book. It's a 4-volume copy that was published with the editing of Shaykh Mashhur Hassan Al-Salman, Hafidhahullah, and the notes of Shaykh Al-Albani, Rahimahullah Ta'ala. So Kitab al-Salati is a chapter in that book. At-Targhib wa-Tarhib. Strong encouragement for doing right and strong discouragement from doing wrong. The English said it's by Al-Hafiz Al-Munziri. Al-Hafiz Al-Munziri. Just to acquaint ourselves with who he is, we wrote here that the name of the scholar referred to here was Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi. Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi. That is the name of Al-Munziri. And he was from the region known as Misru, or we wrote here Misr like that if you want to put a sukoon on it. Misru is a region which we said here includes present-day Egypt, but is not delineated by the same geographical borders that we currently know. So we prefer to retain the Arabic term Misru instead of calling it Egypt, because Egypt in our minds means what is within the borders of that country nowadays. But in previous times, Misru was a region that was a bit larger than that. Al-Munziri lived from 581 to 656 Hijri. 581 to 656 Hijri. That's approximately 1185 to 1258 Common Era. Close to that. After that, another note we wanted to mention here was Shaykh Al-Albani, may Allah have mercy upon him, he said, وَتَدْرِيسِهِ عَلَى بَعْضِ إِخْوَانِنَا السَّلَفِيِّينَ. The English, it just said, and teaching it to our brothers. And they left out an adjective that the Shaykh used here. We wanted to touch on this adjective briefly. For those who came in, if you're following along in the handout, we're currently on note number 4, inshallah. The suggestion we have here, instead of saying our brothers, we were suggesting that we could say here our brothers who strive to follow the course charted by the salaf, the foremost generations of Islam. Our brothers who strive to follow the course charted by the salaf, foremost generations of Islam. We also wanted to just say something here about this word because it's a word we might hear around us sometimes, used by different people. We said that the Arabic term salaf refers to the generations of Islam who were foremost. This is the term we prefer to use. They're foremost from a couple of perspectives. They're foremost with respect to time, meaning chronologically, and they were also foremost with respect to understanding and practicing Islam's teachings. All right? Salaf are foremost in these two regards, not just because they came before us. That's what makes them foremost. They were early, but they're also foremost with respect to understanding and practicing Islam's teachings correctly. Okay? They're foremost in both these regards. That description applies to the companions and the generations who immediately succeeded them. In an authentic hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, may Allah mention him with commendation and grant him protection, said, "The best of people are my generation, then those who follow them, then those who follow them." The hadith says, the best of people are my generation, the generation of the Prophet. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection, and those who are with him, the companions. Then those who follow them, that's a second generation. Then those who follow them, that will be a third generation. So we have three generations here we're talking about. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that these are the best of people. We mentioned the references here where this hadith can be found. It's in both Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. With that in mind, so that was about the word salaf, or if we're going to read it with the ending, salafun. Salafun. Now we said here, with that in mind, there's also this other word that the Shaykh used the plural of, because he said, Ikhwanina salafiyina. So we wanted to add here that with that in mind, the term salafi, however it might be spelled, is an ascription to those generations referred to as the Salaf. All right, Salafi is an ascription to those generations who we call the Salaf. And we said here it's similar to using the word Pakistani to reflect an ascription to the country called Pakistan. That's to a place. Or the term Hanafi, we're going to talk about that word later in this lesson, to reflect an ascription to the scholar commonly known as Al-Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? So this is what the term really means. It's just an ascription to the Salaf. An ascription to the Salaf, the people who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said would be the best of people, or are the best of people. However, this term Salafi may also be used sometimes by people involved in contemporary political and ideological discourse. And this is something that might be discussed sometimes on the news, or maybe in academic writings, in academic institutions, and stuff like that. They may use this word as well. But like I said, it's usually in the context of contemporary, current day political and ideological discourse. And that context, not the one we're talking about here, that context tends to attach other not so nice meanings to this term. We wanted to say that that political or ideological discourse, that context, is something different from the context of our lessons here, and it's something different from the context of statements made by scholars of Islam. So when Shaykh al-Albani says here, our Salafi brothers, or as we would render that into English by saying our brothers who strive to follow the course charted by the Salaf, foremost generations of Islam, when a scholar like a Shaykh al-Albani and others make a remark like this, what we want to understand from it is, it means Muslims, the Shaykh is talking about the brothers around him, He means Muslims who would read and study books with him, and they were striving to learn about Islam from its sources, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah, and to understand those sources, how they were understood by the Prophet, his companions, and the generation who succeeded the companions and learned from them. That's the Prophet's generation, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the companions, and the generation, sorry, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his companions. This would basically be one generation. Then you have the generation who succeeds them. This would be the second generation, and the generation who learned from those successors of the companions. So that's three of those generations. May Allah mention the Prophet with commendation and grant him protection, and may Allah be pleased with the companions. May Allah be pleased with all the companions. May Allah grant his mercy to those foremost generations, and may Allah enable all of us to do what pleases him and what leads us to attaining his mercy. So this is what we wanted to say a little bit about regarding that term and the context in which it's being used here by the author. May Allah have mercy upon him. Continuing onwards after that, he then said, oh, we had one more comment we wanted to make here when he said it was 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago. We mentioned last time when we went through a couple pages prior to this introduction that Shaykh al-Albani, may Allah have mercy upon him, mentioned that he wrote the initial introduction to this book, the one we're reading right now, in the year 1370 Hijri. 1370 Hijri. That corresponds to 1951 Common Era. Okay, this introduction we're reading, the Sheikh wrote this book, as he himself mentioned. I'm just going to scroll back actually a little bit here, just to the page where we pointed this out. This is page 31 in the Arabic copy that we're using right now. He mentioned it right here. He said here, the 13th day of the 6th month of the Hijri year 1370. So this corresponds to 1951. So 4 years prior to that would have been 1947 Common Era. 1947 Common Era. So that is the time period when Shaykh al-Albani, or which he is making reference to here, when he said that they had finished reading Kitab as-Salat, the chapter about prayer in the book of Targhib wa Tarhib by al-Munziri. So that would have been 4 years prior to the Shaykh writing this introduction. That would have been in the Hijri year 1366 approximately, and that would have been somewhere around 1947 Common Era. Continuing onwards now, the Shaykh said after they had read that, after they finished reading it, and after he finished teaching them that portion of At-Targhibu wa Tarhibu, he said, تَبَيَّنَ لَنَا جَمِيعًا مَا لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنَ الْمَنْزِلَةِ وَالْمَكَانَةِ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ. The corresponding English said, it became clear to us all the important position of the prayer in Islam. وَمَا لِمَنْ أَقَامَهَا وَأَحْسَنَ أَدَاءَهَا مِنَ الْأَجْرِ وَالْفَضْلِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. And the reward, grace, and respect awaiting those who establish and perform it well. وأن ذلك يختلف زيادة ونقصا بنسبة قربها أو بعدها من صلاة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The corresponding English says, and that all this varies depending on its closeness to the Prophet's prayer, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We wanted to make a note here regarding where the translation says, or the Arabic part that says binisbati qurbiha aw bu'diha. The English said depending on its closeness, and we said the Arabic, there's nothing objectionable about the English, but it's also possible to express this Arabic in English by saying depending on how close or far it is from. So all this varies depending on how close or far it is from the Prophet's prayer, sallallaahu alayhi wa sallam. Continuing on, the Shaykh then said, كما أشار إلى ذلك بقوله إن العبد لا يصلي الصلاة ما يكتب له منها إلا عشرها تسعها ثمنها سبعها سدسها خمسها ربعها ثلثها نصفها. The corresponding English here says, this is what he indicated in his saying, verily, the slave prays a prayer of which nothing is written down for him except a 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, quarter, third, or half of it. Just a fraction. A person would not have the reward of the entire prayer recorded for him. So this is the text of this hadith that the Shaykh mentioned here. And just a brief point, there's one of the brothers who had asked last week about this hadith. We didn't read it last week, but this is an Arabic question, an Arabic language question. The way this wording here in Arabic, the way this portion of the hadith is constructed, it just says ushruha, tusruha, thumnuha, like this. There are fractions mentioned, and in between them, there is no, what they call in Arabic, harfu atfin. There's no harfu atfin, like a wow, for example. It doesn't say, or aw. It doesn't say illa ushruha wa tusruha, or it doesn't say ushruha aw tusruha aw thumnuha, like this. So one of our brothers, barakallahu fihi, he had asked about this. So in brief, I'll just mention quickly here that in one of the explanations of this hadith, it can be found in a book called At-Tanwir by a scholar named As-San'ani, Muhammad ibn Ismail As-San'ani. That's the same San'ani who has a book called Subul As-Salam, an explanation of Bulugh al-Maram. He mentioned in his explanation of this hadith that it is acceptable in Arabic to leave out the harf al-atfi. In a list like this, it's acceptable to mention the harf al-atfi, and it's also acceptable to leave it out. It's also acceptable to leave it out without affecting the meaning. So we would understand here that it is illa ushruha aw tus'uha aw thumnuha until the end. Just like kind of how we said in English, a person would perform a prayer, nothing is written down for him except a 10th, 9th, all the way down to the end, or half. In English, we don't repeat and or all the time, right? In English, when we make a list, we just mention the and or the or before the last item in the list. Arabic is not like that. Arabic, you repeat the harf al-atf between all the items of the list. But this is an instance where it's acceptable to leave out the harf al-atfi and it does not affect the meaning. And this is what was mentioned based on the little that I was able to look at regarding the construction of the Arabic in this hadith. Now here, the word, we wanted to just say something quick about the fact that this word that was used in the Arabic here was, in the Arabic it said, innal abda, innal abda. And in the English, they had written, verily, the slave. We talked about this earlier, and we made some suggestions in our previous lesson. We said sometimes the word al-abd can be used to refer to human beings in general. And sometimes it could be used to refer to a worshiping servant of Allah in particular. So in this instance here, this is obviously talking about a worshiping servant of Allah, not just any person, because this is the person who's praying. This person was praying. So we could say here, verily, the worshiping servant prays a prayer until the end of the hadith. That would be a suggestion we can make here. Allah knows best. Now, there is a footnote here regarding this hadith. So we'll just read through this footnote quickly. Number one on this page, it says here, it says Sahihun, Rawahu ibn Mubaraki fi Zuhdi, and there's a reference given here. Wa Abu Dawud wa Nasa'i بسند جيد وقد خرجته في الصحيح المذكور. The corresponding English says Sahih, collected by Ibn al-Mubarak in Az-Zuhd, at that reference given, Abu Dawood and Nasa'i with a good sanad. And then Shaykh al-Albani says, I have given its takhrij, or the English for what Shaykh al-Albani said, mentions that he said, I have given its takhrij in Sahih Abi Dawood. A few notes we wanted to mention here. One, regarding the word Sahih, we said last time that our preference here is to say it's authentic at the level of Sahih. Authentic at the level of Sahih, because like we said, the grading of authentic can cover Sahih and it can also cover Hasan. So this in English, when it says Sahih, it would be useful to represent this type of meaning or render this meaning as authentic at the level of Sahih. Ibn Mubarak, we'll try also when we read, just to give a little bit of information about scholars who we read about, to have an idea about where they're from and when they lived. So far today, we mentioned Al-Mundiri, Abdul Azim ibn Abdul Qawi. Now, Ibn Mubarak, this refers to the scholar named Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who was originally from an area that was called Marwu. Marwu. All right, that's how the word is in Arabic. It has one dhamma on the end, Marwu. And I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think in English, they represent this name. I'm not even sure how they say it, but I think they write in English as M-E-R-V. I don't know if they say Merv, I'm not really sure, but anyway. In Arabic, the place is called Marwu, and its location is in present-day Turkmenistan. That's where this area is in terms of if we look on a map nowadays, it's in the country called Turkmenistan. Abdullah ibn Mubarak lived from 118 to 181 Hijri. 118 to 181 Hijri. That's approximately 726 to 797 Common Era. Approximately. Like I said, dates, I think we mentioned this before, I can't remember now, but dates that are really far back, it's difficult to make an exact, to have an exact corresponding year in Common Era years for a Hijri year, because the years that we know nowadays, they weren't always this way. They weren't always this way. The years that we know nowadays, the months were changed a bit, and the years, how they were counted, was also changed a bit. I've forgotten exactly when that was done historically, but it was after the time of Ibn Mubarak. So you can't project when he was living onto the years that we have now. You guys are aware of that? Have you guys come across that? We might talk about that more later, inshallah. I remember when I was still here, when I was still in I think I heard this when I was in middle school here. I think I was taught that in middle school here in Toronto. At any rate, just as an example, just if anyone, when you look at the months of the year, right? Okay, the prefix oct or octo, what does that necessarily, or what does that usually imply? 8, right? October is what month of our year? Is it the 8th month? It's the 10th month, right? And also November, that NOV prefix usually implies what? It normally has something to do with 9. November is not the 9th month, right? November is the 11th month. And December, DEC, decade, those types of words that have a DEC prefix, what does that have to do with? 10. December is what month? Yeah, it's not the 10th month, right? So there are things that happen to the months in our years, the years that we know nowadays, And these are historical things that happened. So I'm just mentioning this. Maybe we might talk about this in more detail, but this is why we're saying it's an approximation, because you can, when the years that we know right now, when these years were put into effect by whoever put them into effect, wherever that was, and they continue till now, we can project Hijri years accurately up to that time, whether it was in the 15th century, 16th century, whatever it was. But before that, we can't. You can make some approximations, but they won't be exact, right? So Ibn Mubarak was from a time prior to that. So that's why we're saying it was approximately 726 to 797 Common Era, CE, Common Era. Okay, that's about Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Now it also said here in Az-Zuhd, we said here that this is the name of a book by Abdullah ibn Mubarak. Abdullah ibn Mubarak actually wrote, or there are narrations collected from him, and they are in a book with the title of Az-Zuhd. And this, like we said, is a book by him. But now we wanted to just say something brief too. This is a word that we hear often. We come across it as Zuhd. We might hear that word. And based on what scholars of Islam have mentioned, this word Zuhd could be understood to convey meanings like, one, shifting one's focus to the hereafter. I'm talking about meanings they mention in Arabic. And I mentioned a couple of resources here afterwards, Madarij as-Salikin by Ibn al-Qayyim, and others as well. One meaning is shifting your focus to the hereafter. Another meaning of a zuhd is avoiding what does not produce benefit in the hereafter, meaning while you're in this world, you avoid things that would not produce benefit in the hereafter. Another meaning they mention too is avoiding what distracts one from Allah. This is also zuhd. Avoiding what distracts one from Allah. These are meanings that are mentioned by the scholars, and it's probably better to use expressions like these rather than the common English equivalent. The commonly found English equivalent of zuhd is what? You guys come across one before? Disinterest in the world, maybe. And also sometimes the word asceticism is used or something like that, right? And you call a zahid an ascetic. If you look up what that word means in English, it's not quite in line with these meanings here that scholars have mentioned. So zuhd, like we said, the basic thing is you're shifting your focus to the hereafter. And it doesn't mean that you're neglecting things of this world, because our path to the hereafter involves us using various things in this world, right? So the idea is your focus is on the hereafter. Your focus is on the hereafter. So no matter what you do in this world and whatever things you use of it or whatever things of this world you partake in, your focus is always on how is this thing and how is what I'm doing and what I'm using going to benefit me then in the hereafter. This is what you're thinking about. So this is what they explain when it comes to this idea of zuhd in Arabic. A couple of the notes we have here. Abu Dawood, we talked about him before. We mentioned earlier, this refers to the scholar named Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath. Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath, he passed away in the year 275 Hijri. And I didn't write in the note here. Maybe I can add this later, inshallah. Abu Dawood, does anyone know where he was from? Does anyone know what his nisba is? He's called Abu Dawud Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath Anyone know? He's called as-Sijistaniyu. As-Sijistaniyu. So he's from this place called Sijistan. And this is it's a historical area. It's a region that doesn't currently exist with that name as far as I know. And based on what I've read, I think it corresponds to an area that's currently called Sistan or something like that. Part of it is in Afghanistan, and part of it is in Iran. And if you look on a map, there's a little area where I think just an eastern portion of Iran is next to a little western part of Afghanistan, and below it, just south of it on the map, is a part of Pakistan there too. This area that was called Sijistan, it's I think it's split over what those borders are nowadays. So part of it might be in Iran, a part might be in Afghanistan, a part might be in Pakistan. Present day, and in terms of the present day borders that we have, that's where Sijistan is, the place where Al-Imam Abu Dawud, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy upon him, was originally from. And Nasa'i as well, we said earlier that his name is Ahmed ibn Shu'aib. Ahmed ibn Shu'aib, he passed away in the year 303 Hijri. Abu Dawud passed away in 275, and Nasa'i passed away in 303. And Nasa'i, he's from a place called Nasa, and if I remember right, I'll have to look this up again, and inshallah, I'll add this to the handout later on. If I remember right, that area it's in, I think it's in northeastern, I think it's in the northeastern part of what is Iran currently, somewhere in that area. So this is where these people were originally from. That one I might be mistaken on, but that's what I seem to recall right now based on things that I've read. Okay. The last thing we want to talk about in this note here, it said bisanadin jayyidin. Bisanadin jayyidin, with a good sanad. We're suggesting to say with an acceptable chain of transmission. We said this could be understood to mean authentic, at least at the level of Hasan. When scholars use this term, it's authentic, at least at the level of Hasan. It could be stronger, but that's the minimum of what Jayyid normally refers to, and Allah knows best. So this is probably what Shaykh Al-Albani is referring to here when he said that. And he said he's given its takhrij in Sahih Abi Dawood. We mentioned that one last time. That's a book in which the Shaykh took all of the ahadith that he graded as either Sahih or Hasan in Sunan Abi Dawud, and he put them in that book called Sahih Sunan Abi Dawud, and he also gave detailed referencing for all of them and discussion of their chains of narration, their chains of transmission in that book. Okay, coming back to the text we are reading now, out of the footnote and back into the body of the book, it says, the author said, Shaykh Al-Albani, may Allah have mercy upon him, continued, وَلِذَلِكَ فَإِنِّي نَبَّهْتُ الْإِخْوَانَ إِلَى أَنَّهُ لَا يُمْكِنُنَا أَدَاؤُهَا حَقَّ الْأَدَاءِ أَوْ قَرِيبًا مِنْهُ إِلَّا إِذَا عَلِمْنَا صفة صلاة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مفصلة وما فيها من واجبات وآداب وهيئات وأدعية وأذكار ثم حرصنا على تطبيق ذلك عمليا. The corresponding portion of the English translation says, therefore, I reminded the brothers that it is not possible for us to perform prayer as it should be performed or even approach that unless we know the detailed description of the Prophet's prayer, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, including its essentials, manners, forms, supplications, du'as, and remembrances, adhkar, and then we make an effort to put that knowledge into practice carefully. Okay, up to here, this is the corresponding portion of that. And we had some notes that we wanted to make here too, or some comments we wanted to make. We said here regarding the term hayatin, they express this as its forms. It says, including its essentials, manners, forms, hayat. We were suggesting we could maybe modify this word, amend it to say positions, because that's what he's talking about here. It doesn't mean a form of prayer, like prayer might have different forms. What it means is the positions or the postures that a person takes while in prayer. That's what it's talking about here. So hayat, the meaning intended here is the various postures during prayer. Also, he mentioned adi'iyatin. Adiyatun is the plural of the word du'a'un. And we were suggesting here to perhaps say words to use for supplicating Allah. Words to use for supplicating Allah, meaning that you humbly request things from Him or of Him. And for adhkarin, they said remembrances. We were suggesting The Arabic word adhkarun is the plural of dhikrun. So we're suggesting here to say words to use for mentioning Allah. Words to use for mentioning Allah. So that would be, to fill those in, we would say it's essentials, manners, positions, words to use for supplicating Allah, and words to use for mentioning Allah. And the Shaykh emphasized here afterward, he said, not only you know that, not only are we to know that, but we're to make an effort to put that knowledge into practice carefully. After that, the Shaykh continued here, and he said, فَحِينَئِذٍ نرجو أن تكون صلاتنا تنهانا عن الفحشاء والمنكر وأن يكتب لنا ما ورد فيها من الثواب والأجر. The corresponding English says, for then we could hope that our prayers would restrain us from shameful and unjust deeds, and that the reward and blessings mentioned in the narrations would be written down for us. There's a note we wanted to make here, or a comment we wanted to make about the term al-fahsha'i wal-munkari. We talked about this before. In the translation, they wrote shameful and unjust deeds, but we were suggesting to say here all that is obscene and all that is unacceptable. All that is unseen and all that is unacceptable. In our comment, we said here clarification preceded about the choice of words in the suggestion. This is based on the fact that Allah said in the Quran, Inna salata tanha an al-fahsha'i wal-munkari. This is what the Shaykh is alluding to here. Indeed, the prayer that is established properly restrains people from all that is obscene and all that is unacceptable. All right? So the Shaykh is saying that when we know all of these various aspects of the prayer according to how it was performed by the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and then we make an effort to put that knowledge into practice carefully, that's when we can hope to have the rewards in the hadith, the hadith we mentioned, and that's when we can hope that our prayers would do what this ayah says. They would restrain us from all that is obscene and all that is unacceptable. So this emphasizes to us and makes clear to us the importance of learning how we need to pray. Now the Shaykh is going to lead into what prompted him to write this book. And we're going to cover a bit of this today. We're going to continue in our next session, inshallah. He said here, وَلَمَّا كَانَ مَعْرِفَةُ ذَلِكَ عَلَى التَّفْصِيلِ يَتَعَذَّرُ عَلَى أَكْثَرِ النَّاسِ حتى على كثير من العلماء لتقيدهم بمذهب معين. The corresponding English says, detailed familiarity with all these aspects of prayer is unlikely to be achieved by most people nowadays, even many scholars, because of their limiting themselves to a particular madhab. Now we want to make a couple remarks here concerning a couple of things that the Shaykh has said. One of them has to do with the translation, actually. It says here, in the Arabic it says, يَتَعَذَّرُ عَلَى أَكْثَرِ النَّاسِ. The English said, it's unlikely to be achieved by most people nowadays. We were suggesting to leave out the word nowadays and just leave it as most people, because there does not seem to be anything in the expression in the Arabic that limits the idea to the time of the author, and Allah knows best. This here can apply at any time, before the time of Shaykh al-Albani writing this, during his time, and even after his time as well. So it may not quite be in line with to say nowadays, because it's not, nothing in the Arabic seems to convey that meaning. And what the Shaykh said applies, it can apply in general at any time. After that, the expression بِمَذْهَبٍ مُعَيَّنٍ, to a particular madhab. They did not translate this word, so we want to talk about what this term means in brief. We said here that the Arabic term madhab might commonly be translated as, well, we have it written. I don't know if everyone's following, but how was madhab translated sometimes? Anyone ever heard an English rendering of it? You've heard that before? School of thought? Right. Now, before we say anything about the suggestion, thought generally has to do, if you were to talk about thought, okay, I'm going to say here that we'll finish our sentence here. We said that the Arabic term madhab might commonly be translated as a school of thought, and it could perhaps also be rendered a bit more accurately as a school of law, as a school of law. When you think about school of thought, what comes to mind? Does anything come to mind when you think about thought? Anything at all? What's that? Maybe. But thought generally has to do with things that are intellectual, things that are not always actions. It might have to do with beliefs, right? You might get the idea that these scholars, their schools of thought, you might think that their beliefs are different. And in reality, the scholars, their beliefs are not different things. Their beliefs are not different things. Okay? Maybe somebody might have some issue with, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa only in certain issues, not everything, in certain issues, Aqidah issues, maybe. But the beliefs of the scholars in general, they're one thing. They're not different things. So what the differences or discrepancies, the realm that might exist in, those have to do with actions, certain things, and they're not they don't have differences to be in opposition to each other. They have justifications and reasons why they understood Islam's laws and directives a certain way from Islam's texts, from the Quran and Sunnah, right? So this is part of the reason why we prefer to say it might be a little bit more accurate. If we wanted to use this school of something, it might be a little bit more accurate to say a school of law rather than a school of thought. Now, madhab essentially refers to the approach of particular scholars, which a person may follow, any person in general might follow, the approach of particular scholars concerning Islamic law and legal theory. This is what we would say a madhab refers to. The approach of particular scholars, and it's an approach which a person can follow concerning Islamic law and legal theory. In other words, it's an approach to the approach certain scholars take to what directives are understood from Islam's texts and how those directives can be deduced from the texts. This is basically what a madhab is. An approach scholars take to what are the directives we understand from an ayah? What are the directives we understand from a hadith? And also, how do we go about understanding these directives from that ayah or from that hadith? Okay? So this is what we mean when we say it's an approach of particular scholars concerning Islamic law and legal theory. Okay? This is the idea here. So that's basically what a madhab is. Now we'll continue along here. Let's just see for a second. We have, right. Continuing on here, the Arabic says, وَقَدْ عَلِمَ كُلُّ مُشْتَغِلٍ بِخِدْمَةِ السُنَّةِ الْمُطَهَّرَةِ جَمْعًا وَتَفَقُّهًا أن في كل مذهب من المذاهب سننا لا توجد في المذاهب الأخرى. The corresponding English translation said, but as anyone concerned with assisting in compiling and studying the purified Sunnah knows, as anyone concerned with assisting in compiling and studying the purified Sunnah knows, in every madhab, there are Sunnahs which are not found in other madhabs. In every madhab, every approach for what we talked about just now, taken by particular scholars, there are certain aspects of the Sunnah that are not found in other madhabs, meaning the approaches taken by other scholars to understand Islam's directives from the Quran and the Sunnah. The Shaykh continued by saying here, وَفِيهَا جَمِيعِهَا مَا لَا يَصِحُّ نِسْبَتُهُ إِلَى النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم من الأقوال والأفعال. Moreover, the corresponding English says, moreover, in every madhab, there are sayings and actions which cannot be authentically traced back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Shaykh then continued saying, وَأَكْثَرُ مَا يُوجَدُ ذَلِكَ في كتب المتأخرين وكثيرا ما نراهم يجزمون بعزو ذلك إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The corresponding English said, most of these are found in the sayings of the later scholars, many of whom we see firmly attributing these to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now, there are two sort of lengthy footnotes here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to cover one of them. I think that will take us to the end of today's session. This is going to be footnote in the Arabic copy. It's going to be footnote number 2 on page 33. It starts on page 33 and goes over to page 34. This will be one of the footnotes. And in our next session, we're going to cover another related footnote here. So this note we're going to read is about the portion that says, وَأَكْثَرُ مَا يُوجَدُ ذَلِكَ فِي كُتُبِ الْمُتَأَخِّرِينَ. The English said for this, most of these here referring to things, words, and actions that are attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but their attribution is not accurate. It's not correct. They're not authentically traced back to him. He said here, the corresponding English said, most of these are found in the sayings of the later scholars. Now, what Shaykh al-Albani did, rahimahullah, is he has a footnote here in which he says, قال أبو الحسنات اللكنوي في كتابه النافع الكبير لمن يطالع الجامع الصغير. Sorry, it's usually my practice to read the endings on all the words, but I'm just putting a sukoon on al-kabir and al-saghir here because in book titles, sometimes the book titles, they're written in such a way that their various parts, they rhyme with each other. So if I were to read this book title out, it won't rhyme. Like if I say, في كتابه النافع الكبير لمن يطالع الجامع الصغير, it wouldn't have that. So this is the reason why I chose to read the ending with a sukoon. Otherwise, for learning, as we come together when we learn, it's always useful to read the endings on all the words. Nonetheless, في كتابه النافع الكبير لمن يطالع الجامع الصغير بعد أن ذكر مراتب كتب الفقه الحنفي وما يعتمد عليه منها وما لا يعتمد قال. The corresponding English said, Abu al-Hasanat al-Laknawi says in An-Nafi' al-Kabir liman yutali' al-Jami' al-Saghir, after ranking the books of Hanafi fiqh and saying which of them are dependable and which are not, and then he says that he then quotes what Abu al-Hasanat mentioned. Before going on to the quote, we wanted to say a few things here. Abu al-Hasanat al-Laknawi, we said that this refers to the scholar Muhammad Abdul Hayy ibn Muhammad Abdul Azim. This is what his name was. He has one of these compound names. You know, some people from certain places, they have a compound name, right? Muhammad Abdul Hayy, all of that is his name. And he's the son of Muhammad Abdul Azim. Muhammad Abdul Azim is his father's name. So this is who Abu al-Hasanat al-Laknawi is. He was from Al-Hind. We said here India just as an approximation, but historically the region called Al-Hind was not necessarily delineated by the exact borders that we know right now. But so that's why we kept both words. He's from a place called Al-Hind or al-Hindu, as we would put it. You put one dhamma if you read the word in Arabic. He passed away relatively young, living from 1264 to 1304 Hijri. 1264 to 1304 Hijri, and that would correspond to 1848 to 1887 Common Era. So that wasn't too long ago, and he was just about approximately 40 years old when he passed away. He said in this book of his called Al-Nafi' Al-Kabir Liman Yutali'u Al-Jami' As-Saghir. This book of his, we said that this book that Shaykh Al-Albani is going to quote from, Al-Nafi' Al-Kabir, this is an explanation of a fiqh book. It's an explanation of a fiqh book. That fiqh book is called Al-Jami' As-Saghir, and this specific Al-Jami' As-Saghir, it's a fiqh book, like we said. This is by the esteemed scholar Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. He's the author of the book Al-Jami' As-Saghir, and the explanation called Al-Nafi' Al-Kabir is written by this person, Abu al-Hasanat al-Laknawi. Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, he's a very early scholar. He lived from 131 Hijri to 189 Hijri. All right, 131 to 189. This is really early. And he was one of the most prominent students of Al-Imam Abu Hanifa. May Allah have mercy upon him, and may Allah have mercy upon all of the scholars of Islam. So we'll talk about Abu Hanifa shortly, inshallah. But we just wanted to say that's what this book is. All right, it's by Al-Laknawi, and it's an explanation, his explanation of a fiqh book by Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani. The Shaykh used the term here, al-fiqh al-Hanafi. Al-fiqh al-Hanafi, and the English called it Hanafi fiqh. Hanafi fiqh. We wanted to suggest that we could say here, if we render this into English, based on what we talked about earlier, we could say here, the Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory. The Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory. We also wanted to comment here, and we wanted to say that when the Shaykh uses this word Hanafi fiqh, I wanted to mention this because sometimes maybe we might hear this word used, or maybe we might use it in a way that might not be that nice, or we want to make an insinuation about something or someone. We wanted to say here that this word is not a sectarian or derogatory expression. When the Shaykh is saying al-fiqh al-Hanafi, which they put in the translation as Hanafi fiqh, or even if we, according to our suggestion, the Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory, this is not sectarian or derogatory. This is not what we mean when we say this. Rather, this refers to the approach regarding what directives are understood from Islam's texts and how those directives can be deduced from the texts. Okay? It's the approach regarding these things that was attributed to and developed by Al-Imam, meaning the leading scholar of Islam. It was attributed to and developed by Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, as well as some of his prominent students who learned from him directly. And it was also attributed to and developed by some of the scholars who came from subsequent generations and ascribed themselves to the approach of Abu Hanifa. Okay? This is what we are talking about when we say Hanafi fiqh, or the Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory. It's an approach developed by, or it's an approach attributed to Abu Hanifa. We said here his name is An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. Abu Hanifa's name is An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, and he lived from 80 to 150 Hijri. 80 to 150. He was really early. He was born in the year 80 Hijri. And he lived until 150 Hijri. Now, we said here, now take note of this too, when we say Hanafi fiqh, this is something that is attributed to Abu Hanifa, developed by Abu Hanifa, and it's also developed by some of his prominent students, direct students, and it's also developed by some of the scholars who came from subsequent generations and ascribed themselves to Abu Hanifa's approach. All of that is included in this when we say the Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory. So this is what Shaykh al-Albani, may Allah have mercy upon him and upon all of our scholars, is referring to here when he says al-fiqh al-Hanafi. All right. So that is regarding that. And we can move on a little bit more into this footnote here, where he starts quoting Abu Hasanat al-Laknawi. It says here that kullu ma dhakarna. Actually, sorry, just before we move on, there's just a note I wanted to mention here too. Did I put this in our notes here? Let me see. Under number 21. All right, there's a comment I'll make here. Maybe I forgot to write it down, or maybe I might have misplaced it in our notes. What I wanted to say here is that you see in the reference that's given here, it says in the Arabic and in the English too, it says it's on page 122 to 123. What we're going to read is on page 122 to 123 of a particular book. This book, An-Nafi' al-Kabir. What I wanted to do is, in the Arabic, for those who are following along in the Arabic copy, if they happen to have one handy, and for those who are following on the broadcast or those who look on this recording later on, inshallah, you'll notice here on the screen, there's a beginning of a quotation mark. There's an end of quotation here. So this signifies who's speaking and where the quotation begins and ends. And I'm going to make reference to this later on, but just keep something in mind here where it says that this is on page 122 to 123. Okay, we're going to come back to this shortly after we finish reading this quote, because I actually wanted to go and see where the quote was. I found an Arabic copy of the book that I had wanted to show up on the screen, but I wasn't sure how to get it up on the screen right now, but I'll have it here in the recording, inshallah. Okay, so we're going to read a little bit, and when we get to the end of the quote, we'll talk about this reference right here. It says now, this is al-Laknawi talking, Shaykh al-Albani is quoting him, كل ما ذكرنا من ترتيب المصنفات إنما هو بحسب المسائل الفقهية. The English for that says, all that we have said about the relative grades of these compilations is related to their content of fiqh issues. وأما بحسب ما فيها من الأحاديث النبوية فلا. However, as for their content with regards to ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, then it does not apply. فكم من كتاب معتمد اعتمد عليه أجلة الفقهاء مملوء من الأحاديث الموضوعة ولا سيما الفتاوى. The corresponding English said, for many books on which the cream of the fuqaha rely are full of fabricated ahadith, let alone rulings of the scholars. This is how they had it in the existing English. There are a couple of remarks we'll make here. It said it says here in the English, I'm sorry, in the Arabic, it says اعتمد عليه أجلة الفقهاء. Or ajilatul fuqaha, that specific expression. The English says the cream of the fuqaha, the cream of the fuqaha. Just to clarify, the term cream, we might be familiar with this in English. The term cream refers to the best individuals among a group. The cream of such and such is the best individuals among a group of things, a group of people, or I mean, what's an expression you guys know? The cream of something. Right, the crop, right? So there it's talking about a harvest, but it can refer to people too. So when they're saying the cream of the fuqaha, it means the best individuals among them. Now, what are fuqaha exactly? We said that in the context, as for the context in which the Arabic term of fuqaha, which is the plural of faqih, is being used here, in the remark of Abu Hasan al-Laknawi, it basically means specialists in the aforementioned approach regarding Islamic law and legal theory. That's what fuqaha here means. Specialists in the aforementioned approach, the approach taken by or that's attributed to Abu Hanifa, may Allah have mercy upon him, as well as and developed further by some of his students and those other scholars from subsequent generations who ascribe to Abu Hanifa's approach. That's what it means here, specialists in that approach. But what we want to say in a more general and comprehensive context is a meaning that can be found in the words of numerous scholars concerning the term al-faqih is that it refers to someone who has knowledge and understanding of Islam's texts and also acts in compliance with that knowledge and understanding. All right? Faqih, in a general sense, in a comprehensive sense, is what they explain. And this is mentioned in some of the narrations that come from some of the Salaf, some of the foremost generations of Islam. This is how they explain al-faqih. And one of them, if I'm not mistaken, is Sha'bi, if I remember right. Nonetheless, there's a couple of books here by Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi that we gave as references. One of them is Al-Faqih wal-Mutafaqih, and the other one is Iqtida' al-Ilm al-Amal. And at those numbers provided, there are narrations about this. And these are not the only places you can find this idea. But the idea conveyed is the faqih is someone who has knowledge and understanding of Islam's texts and also acts in compliance with that knowledge and understanding. This is what a faqih means, according to some of the narrations from the Salaf, the foremost generations of Islam. As for faqih being used here and the fuqaha being discussed here in the context that we're reading, this is just talking about specialists in a particular approach of Islamic law or in a particular approach to Islamic law and legal theory. All right? That's about the faqih. And the last piece of the Arabic that we read here, la siyama al-fatawa, we're suggesting here to change that a little bit because the intended meaning, it should probably say something like, especially the books of the fatawa category, meaning works containing edicts given by various scholars who ascribe to the aforementioned approach. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting we say this is because this comment here that was made by al-Laknawi, this was said after, in that book, An-Nafi al-Kabir, it was said after mention was made of three categories of books, okay? Three categories of books in this Hanafi approach to Islamic law and legal theory. One category of book is called mutun, which are relatively concise instructional books that conform with the aforementioned approach, the approach taken by Abu Hanifa and others as we mentioned. That's one. Then there's another category of the books that they use, which are called shuruh. Those are larger works that explain the relatively concise books. Then there are other books that are called fatawa, and those are works containing edicts concerning an array of religious issues. That was expressed as rulings of the scholars in the existing translation, where they wrote, let alone rulings of the scholars. That's what they're referring to as fatawa. So here, what al-Laknawi did is he was referring to these three categories of books. So this word fatawa was mentioned as one of the types of books that are used in the approach to Islamic law and legal theory ascribed to Imam Abu Hanifa. Now I'm just going to try to put something up here. I apologize to those who are in attendance that I can't get it up on the screen, but I'm going to try to get it up at least on my screen here so it can be seen in the broadcast, inshallah. I'm just going to try to see if I can, let me see here, if I can share. So just bear with me for a moment. There's another book that we had. Actually, hold on. Let's see if we do it like this. Okay. I have something here, and for those who will see this broadcast later on, inshallah, or those who are viewing it now and those who will look at the recording later. This is an older copy of the book, and you'll notice right here, it begins with the thing we just read, كل ما ذكرنا من ترتيب المصنفات إنما هو بحسب المسائل الفقهية الصوم. It begins here. You'll notice that there's the word before it, تتمة here. This means it came sort of at the conclusion of a longer discussion that the author had earlier. And something we wanted to say right here in this regard is that in the Arabic that we're reading, afterwards, you'll notice that actually there's a little bit more. We'll come to that. So it continues. The quote continues. Let's just read that a little bit here. Let me switch back. In Shaykh al-Albani's book, in the quote where he's continuing, it says here, فَقَدْ وَضَحَ لَنَا بِتَوْسِيعِ النَّظَرِ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَهَا وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنَ الْكَامِلِينَ لَكِنَّهُمْ فِي نَقْلِ الْأَخْبَارِ مِنَ الْمُتَسَاهِلِينَ. The corresponding English said, it is clear to us from a broad analysis that although their authors were otherwise competent, they were careless in their quotation of narrations. This is what Al-Laknawi was saying. Now after that, we're going to go over to page 34 of the Arabic. There's this word here, قلت. So I was just curious from my own understanding. You'll see in the Arabic there's this double bracket signifying an end quote, and then the word قلت. I just wanted to make sure from my own understanding that this was a Shaykh al-Albani saying this. So I went and looked in a more recent copy of this book, An-Nafi al-Kabir, and I found this quote on page 31. Now remember, we said that in what we're reading, it said that the quote was on page what? 122 to 123. So there's a big difference between those two numbers. So I was wondering what happened, and what I ended up coming across is I actually found a copy. I went and looked for a copy of the older Indian edition of the book. This book here, I said that I wrote here, what did I search for? I searched on the internet for a scanned copy of the older Indian edition of An-Nafi al-Kabir, and Allah made it possible to find a copy of it. And its year of printing seems to be 1291 Hijri. 1291 Hijri, that's 1874 Common Era. And the portion quoted, for those who will be able to see the screen, it's actually here on page 13, as you can see on the border. And the quote we read is right here. It starts with this word tatimmatun, and it ends at this word here, al-mutasahilina. That's where we just read up to. So, and the discussion that precedes this, it's earlier on page 12 of the book up here. So what I wrote here is, it seems that the reference given in the book that we're reading, both the Arabic and the English, might actually be a typo. And it's supposed to say page 12 to 13 rather than 122 to 123. And Allah knows best. This might not be a big detail, but this is just something I came across after going back and looking at the original book, just to make sure that it's a Shaykh al-Albani saying qultu, because I wanted just to ensure that for myself when preparing the lesson. Allah knows best. So it seems, based on this, that in the actual book, the old copy, it's on page 12 to 13, not 122 to 123. It seems there's an extra 2, and that might be a typo, and Allah knows best. Okay, now Shaykh al-Albani, he said qultu. We talked about this before. You'll notice in the English, there's just an end quote, right? The quote from Abul Hasanat and Laknawi ended, and what follows is a remark from the author, Shaykh al-Albani. The end quote, that punctuation in the English, suffices to clarify who the speaker is before and after it. We know before the quotation mark is al-Laknawi, and after the quotation mark is al-Albani. So an English equivalent for qultu, like we said in our last session, like I would like to point out, may have been omitted here from the translation because its function was already fulfilled by the punctuation. Now, we'll move on to a little bit more of what is written here in the Arabic. It now says, قلت ومن هذه الأحاديث الموضوعة بل الباطلة التي وردت في بعض كتب الأجلة حديث. The corresponding English says, one of these false fabricated ahadith, which are found in some of the best books, is, before we read the hadith, we wanted to say here that the Arabic says, في بعض كتب الأجلة, in some of the best books, but in reality, a better way of saying this would be the books by some highly esteemed scholars. The books by some highly esteemed scholars. Kutub al-ajillati. Al-ajillatu, does anybody know what the mufrad of ajillatun is? Anyone? Jalilun. Jalilun is the mufrad, right? So it's just describing the scholars, saying they're various highly esteemed scholars in their books. So that's what a better way of saying this might be, which are found in some of the books by some highly esteemed scholars, or which are found in the books by some highly esteemed scholars. After that, the Arabic says that the hadith, the wording of the hadith, this hadith is mawdu, it's fabricated. من قضى صلوات من الفرائض في آخر جمعة من رمضان كان ذلك جابرا لكل صلاة فاتته في عمره إلى 70 سنة. The English here said, he who offers the compulsory prayers on the last Friday of Ramadan, that will make up for every prayer he missed during his life up to the age of 70 years. Now, just a note here before we continue. It says, قضى صلوات من الفرائض. The word here in Arabic says قضى, قضى. In the English, they wrote offers the compulsory prayers. He who offers the compulsory prayers. But that's not what this thing is saying. It's saying, our suggestion here is to amend this to say, he who makes up missed compulsory prayers. It's supposed to say, he who makes up missed compulsory prayers on the last Friday of Ramadan to the end of it. We said this suggestion might perhaps express the intended meaning a bit more clearly. After that, right, it says here, قال اللكنوي رحمه الله في الآثار المرفوعة في الأخبار الموضوعة بعد أن ساق هذا الحديث. The English translation says, Laknawi rahimahullah says in Al-Athar al-Marfu'a fil Akhbar al-Mawdu'a, page 315, after giving this hadith, we'll read his remark in a moment. This book here, like I said, we try to say a little bit about the scholars we read about and about the books mentioned. This book here is called Al-Athar al-Marfu'a fil Akhbar al-Mawdu'a. This is a book that Al-Laknawi wrote about particular fabricated narrations, or in other words, particular lies attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection. This book here, right? This is a book that's called. This is a book about fabricated narrations or lies ascribed to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It says, قال علي القاري في موضوعاته الصغرى والكبرى باطل قطعا. Al-Laknawi is being quoted as saying, Ali al-Qari says in his Al-Mawdu'at al-Sughra and al-Kubra, this is totally false. This is totally false. Here we have Ali al-Qari and Mawdu'at Sughra, Mawdu'at Kubra. We'll say something about these before continuing. Here, Ali al-Qari, has anybody heard of him before? Ali al-Qari, or any books of his? No? Okay, Ali al-Qari, we wrote about him. This refers to a scholar whose name is Ali ibn Sultan Muhammad. Ali ibn Sultan Muhammad, he died in the year 1014 Hijri. 1014 Hijri, which is approximately 1606 Common Era. He was originally from present-day Afghanistan. He's from a place called Herat, and that location is in present-day Afghanistan. And he later traveled to Mecca and remained there. Ali al-Qari. For those who might be in touch with explanations of hadith, he has a book called Mirqat al-Mafatih. Mirqat al-Mafatih. It's an explanation of a hadith book called Mishkat al-Masabih. He has many books, many books. So here, Mawdu'at Sughra and Mawdu'at Kubra. What are these two books? Al-Mawdu'at al-Sughra refers to Ali al-Qari's book entitled Al-Masnu' fi Ma'rifat al-Hadith al-Mawdu'. Al-Masnu' fi Ma'rifat al-Hadith al-Mawdu'. That's Al-Mawdu'at al-Kubra. And he has another book called Al-Asrar al-Marfu'ah fil Akhbar al-Mawdu'ah. This is also Ali al-Qari's book, and that's what Al-Mawdu'at al-Sughra. I'm sorry, I got those mixed up. Give me a second. Let me backtrack. Al-Masnu' fi Ma'rifat al-Hadith al-Mawdu', that's Al-Mawdu'at al-Sughra. I'm sorry, that's Al-Mawdu'at al-Sughra. Al-Masnu' fi Ma'rifat al-Hadith al-Mawdu'. And that's al-Sughra, and al-Kubra is, that's the name, the real name of the book is Al-Asrar al-Marfu'ah fil Akhbar al-Mawdu'ah. Both of these books by Ali al-Qari have to do with fabricated narrations attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah mention him with commendation and grant protection. So continuing on this quote, it says, لأنه مناقض للإجماع على أن شيئا من العبادات لا يقوم مقام فائتة سنوات. It is totally false because it contradicts the ijma', consensus of opinion, that one act of worship cannot make up for those missed over years. One act of worship cannot make up for those missed over years. ثم لا عبرة بنقل صاحب النهاية ولا بقية شراح الهداية لأنهم ليسوا من المحدثين ولا أسندوا الحديث إلى أحد من المخرجين. The English says, hence, there is no point in quoting the author of An-Nihaya, nor the rest of the commentators on Al-Hidayah, for they are not scholars of hadith, nor did they reference this hadith to any of the collectors of hadith. Now we're going to get into a point that Shaykh Al-Albani is going to comment on later, but we're going to say a few things about these books here, especially in light of the fact that we talked about the Hanafi approach to understanding the directives understood from the Quran and the Sunnah. These books are all part of that madhab and that approach to Islamic law and legal theory. The book An-Nihaya, which is mentioned here, this is a book by a scholar known as As-Sighnaqi. As-Sighnaqi. This is the nisbah that he's commonly known by. He died in the year 711 Hijri. That's approximately 1312 Common Era. And this scholar, the author of An-Nihaya, As-Sighnaqi, he's from a region that was once in the past referred to as Turkestan. And this is not a place that exists now officially, but this region called Turkestan, some of it would appear nowadays to be in present-day Russia, and some of it also in present-day China, the western portion of China. And Allah knows best. This book, An-Nihaya, is an explanation of another book called Al-Hidayah. Okay? Nihaya, this one here by Sighnaqi, is the explanation of a book called Al-Hidayah, which we're going to mention next. So Al-Hidayah is an explanation of a shorter book called Bidayatul Mubtadi. Bidayatul Mubtadi. So this is the book names, they all rhyme. The original book is called Bidayatul Mubtadi. So it has the word Bidayah in it. Now, Bidayatul Mubtadi, as we mentioned here, this is written by a scholar named Al-Marghinani, Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Maghinani, he lived from 530 to 593 Hijri. That's approximately 1135 to 1197 Common Era. And Marghinani is from this place, Marghinan, and that is a location that's in present-day Uzbekistan. Okay, that's where he's from. So he has a book called Bidayat al-Mubtadi. Bidaya is in its name. He himself wrote an explanation for Bidayat al-Mubtadi. It's called Al-Hidayah. So Marghinani wrote two books. He wrote a small book called Bidayat al-Mubtadi. Then he wrote an explanation called Al-Hidayah. And then there are a number of books that are explanations of this Hidayah book. Nihaya is one of them, right? So you see they all kind of rhyme. Bidayah, Hidayah, Nihaya. And there are other books too, Ri'aya, Niqaya, all these other books too. So they all kind of rhyme like that. They're all based around this initial book, Bidayat al-Mubtadi. Now, the portion that we read said that they were not scholars of hadith, and they did not reference the hadith to any of the collectors of hadith. The meaning intended here appears to be the scholars who put together collections of ahadith in which they mention each hadith along with their chain of transmission for it. Okay, this is not these are what you call primary hadith sources, where you have a collection, and before every hadith there's a chain of transmission. So what he's saying here is, the basic idea is there's some fiqh books, and in some of these fiqh books, the scholars mention hadith as basis for why they say certain things. But what this remark from Ali al-Qari is saying is that some of those scholars who wrote those fiqh books, they were not hadith scholars. And what happened is they quoted things in their books. And you can't, just because this text is written in this fiqh book, you can't take it just like that and say, okay, here's a hadith and I'm going to comply with it and act based on it. Because he's saying that, to reiterate what he said here, as the English translation said, they were not scholars of hadith, nor did they reference the hadith that they put in their book to any collectors of hadith, meaning a hadith book that actually has chains of transmission and so on. So this is a concept which, like I said, is going to be reiterated a little bit later. Are we still good for time? We have a little bit of time left? Okay. Here, Shaykh al-Albani continues, وذكره الشوكاني في الفوائد المجموعة في الأحاديث الموضوعة بنحو هذا اللفظ وقال. The English says that Shawkani also mentioned this hadith in الفوائد المجموعة في الأحاديث الموضوعة with a similar wording, and then said, quickly, we'll just say something about a Shawkani here. A Shawkani, his name is Muhammad ibn Ali al-Shawkani. He's from Al-Yemen, or as they say, Yemen nowadays. He's from a place called Al-Yemen. He lived from 1173 to 1250 Hijri. That's 1760 to 1834. It's not too long ago. And the book of his mentioned here is also a book about particular fabricated narrations attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So what did the Shawkani say? هذا موضوع بلا شك ولم أجده في شيء من الكتب التي جمع مصنفوها فيها الأحاديث الموضوعة. He said that this is fabricated beyond doubt. I do not even find it in any of the compilations of fabricated ahadith. ولكنه اشتهر عند جماعة من المتفقهة بمدينة صنعاء في عصرنا هذا، وصار كثير منهم يفعلون ذلك، ولا أدري من وضعه لهم، فقبح الله الكذابين. انتهى الصفحة 54. It says here in the English, however, it has become popular among some students of fiqh in the city of Sana'a in this age of ours, and many of them have started acting according to it. I do not know who has fabricated it for them. May Allah disgrace the liars. A couple notes we wanted to mention here. Sana'a is the city, current day Sana'a is the city that is the capital, the official capital of present day Yemen. And within current day Sana'a, there's something called the Old City of Sana'a. The Old City of Sana'a. That might have been where Shawkani was residing. the old city. That's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's called that, the old city of Sana'a. And in light of mentioning things about Yemen, we also pray to Allah that He grants a beneficial resolution to the current circumstances of strife in Yemen and in all the lands of the people of Islam. The expression here, after mentioning Sana'a, this statement in Arabic says, فَقَبَحَ اللَّهُ الْكَذَّابِينَ فَقَبَحَ اللَّهُ الْكَذَّابِينَ. We are suggesting to say that Allah has distanced such liars from all goodness. People who lie about the Prophet ﷺ, Allah has distanced them from all goodness. The logic behind that, or the rationale, is because قَبَحَهُ اللَّهُ without a shadda is explained to convey the meaning of Allah distancing or expelling someone. You can find this in Lisan al-Arab and other Arabic dictionaries. So it means Allah distancing, and it's possible to understand this expression being discussed, قَبَحَ, what did it say? فَقَبَحَ اللَّهُ الْكَذَّابِينَ, as being a statement of a fact rather than a supplication. And our suggestion is made with that understanding in mind. So it means, and Allah has distanced such liars from all goodness. All right? It's not saying, may Allah disgrace the liars. Allah knows best. Maybe that's a possible understanding, but the understanding that we have based on what we just said might be one that we are in more favor of. After this, it says here, ثم قال اللكنوي وقد ألفت لإثبات وضع هذا الحديث الذي يوجد في كتب الأوراد والوظائف بألفاظ مختلفة مختصرة ومطولة بالدلائل العقلية والنقلية رسالة مسماة ردع الإخوان عن محدثات آخر جمعة رمضان، وأدرجت فيها فوائد تنشط بها الأذهان وتصغي إليها الآذان فلتطالع فإنها نفيسة في بابها رفيعة الشأن or رفيعة الشان. You can read it either way. The English says, Lucknowi further says, to establish that this hadith, which is found in books of rituals and formulas, is fabricated, I have composed a brief essay with intellectual and narrated evidence called Repelling the Brethren from the Inventions of the Last Friday of Ramadan, in which I have filed points which will enlighten minds and to which ears will hearken. So consult it, for it is valuable in this topic and of high quality. We have a few comments we want to make here. Maybe what we'll do, inshallah, we'll go through these comments and we'll close off here for this session, inshallah. في كتب الأوراد والوظائف, we wanted to make a note about this. In the translation, it says in books of rituals and formulas. We're suggesting to amend this and say in books about words to be said or deeds to be performed at regular intervals and particular recurring circumstances. And there's a portion that wasn't translated. We're going to add here, cited with various wordings, some concise and some lengthy. That can be added to the translation. Now, regarding wadha'if and awrad, maybe we might have heard these words before. Rituals and formulas are not words we favor. What we'd like to say here is something about what we said. We said the Arabic terms being discussed here refer to things that are to be said or done at particular times or intervals. And some elaboration about this in Arabic can be found at the end of Ibn Rajab's book, Jami' al-Ulumi wal-Hikam. And there's another book by Ibn Rajab that actually has the word wadha'if in it. And maybe some of the content might have been presented here at the center in the past, I'm not sure. It's called Lata'if al-Ma'arif Fima li Mawasim al-Ami min al-Wadha'if. This book is devoted to the concept of wadha'if throughout the entire year, month by month, based on texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, though not all the hadith and athar in the book are authentic. The author said, بِالدَّلَائِلِ الْعَقْلِيَّةِ وَالنَّقْلِيَّةِ, with intellectual and narrated evidence. Narrated evidence basically means text from the Quran and the Sunnah. Intellectual evidence refers to other rational evidence and not a text of the Quran and the Sunnah. A book was mentioned here, رد الإخوان عن محدثات آخر جمعة رمضان. Instead of transliterating, the translators or the translation expressed the meaning of the book's title. They didn't actually transliterate, they actually said the meaning of the title. So that we just wanted to point that out. أدرجت فيها فوائد, in which I have included various beneficial points. We wanted to modify it to that. And lastly, we wanted to add something about this word hearken, to which ears will hearken. It basically means people's ears will listen attentively. Hearken might not be a word we use that commonly at present, but it basically just means that people will listen to it. What we'll do is we'll close off here, inshallah. It's Asr time. And inshallah, with Allah's assistance and by Allah's will, we will continue, we'll resume next session from the point where we stopped today, inshallah. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد. May Allah grant commendation and protection to our Prophet Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان, and to his family, companions, and who continue following their path. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah bestow upon all of you His protection, His mercy, and many of His blessings.